Well, I told you last week that there probably wouldn't be much rain over the southeast U.S., and unfortunately I was right. Very little rain fell over the region. This is the last 7 days. You can see that the rain pretty much stopped along the Mississippi River, and everything east of there, no rain at all. Right along the coast there, you can see the North Carolina, Virginia coast. Those are the outer bands associated with Sandy. I am covering Sandy in other briefings, so if you'd like to see the coverage of Sandy, go to the BlueWaterOutlook.com main page, and you can either view the latest video or you can sign up for updates whenever I update that. Usually about once a day. I might issue it a little bit more often once it moves inland. So with no rain, once again, the percent of normal rainfall is 0, and that is pretty much the story over the entire southeast east U.S. last week. Florida did receive a little bit of rain. Again, that was with Sandy, just brushed along the far eastern coast. And then up north of us, closer to that area of low pressure, the trough of low pressure, parts of northern Kentucky up into Missouri and the Ohio River Valley, more rain in that area as well. Taking a look at the drought monitor, here's the update from this past week. Not much change. We see that the core of drought is still centered in Georgia. And I want to zoom in on that and just sort of point out that the current reading for drought, the most extreme drought, is about 23% compared to 22% last month and 40% a couple months ago. Now, keep in mind, I've said this a couple times, that during the heat of the summer, you're going to see quicker changes on the downside. And that's what, even though we did not receive any rain, you see that it only increased by 1% or so, not even 1%. And that is to be expected with cooler temperatures. We're just not getting the evapotranspiration anymore, evaporation from upper soils. And the soils are holding any moisture a little bit more, even though in this case there hasn't been any. So don't expect any big changes. Now the jet stream, always interesting. I know I focus a lot on the big picture because I think when we're talking about longer term water resources, it's important to focus on the big picture, not as much on the day-to-day changes. So let's look at the jet stream. Early in the week, that's that blue line. We have that trough of low pressure over the eastern U.S. Now, I've been talking for, I can't even remember how long it's been now, for a number of weeks on this low pressure in the east. And that's interacting with Sandy as it moves onshore, and it's going to really produce a lot of heavy rain up in the northeast U.S. By late in the week, what we see is that the pattern in yellow here, sort of a sloppy, nothing all that impressive from west to east. And I did look at the anomalies, pressure anomalies. These are whether pressure is either too high or too low. And for the most part, they're very weak. So what we're seeing is sort of a weak west to east flow, fairly normal for this time of year. I think what's interesting, though, is because I've been talking about that trough on the east so much, there's a fairly high correlation between that establishment of that trough and this Arctic oscillation. And the Arctic oscillation is a difference in pressure between the Arctic and further to the south. And what we see here is we've been in this Arctic oscillation for most of October. And actually, we got in a fairly strong Arctic oscillation in the middle part of the month. So that was one of the features that this trough of low pressure has been anchored over the east. And what we see here is the forecast is calling for, as we get into November, is to go up into positive territory, which will probably mean that that trough will not be as pronounced over the eastern U.S. and keep temperatures somewhat more moderate than this cool spell that we have been having more recently. I think from a side note, if we would not have had that Arctic oscillation, we probably wouldn't have had the outcome we're getting with Sandy over the eastern U.S. as well. Okay, so let's take a look at precipitation outlooks for the southeast U.S. over the next couple weeks. First of all, this is week 1, and unfortunately, we need rain, and it looks like with that jet stream and the atmospheric energy to our north, really don't see much coming into our area that would produce any significant rainfall. The impacts from Sandy are the area in red there, that's to the north of us. It looks like the entire southeast U.S. from Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, much of North Carolina as well. Looks like it's going to be very dry with very little, if any, rain. We could see 2 weeks in a row without any rain over significant parts of the southeast U.S. Looking a little bit further ahead, this is week 1 and week 2. We do see a little bit more chance of rain on week 2, but again, right now I don't think it's anything all that impressive with the front moving through, and I'll be covering that in either the midweek outlook or else next week's weekly water outlook. But for this week, it looks very quiet. So the takeaway points for this week's briefing: too much rain, but that's up towards the northeast and mid-Atlantic area. Over the southeast U.S., not enough. The AO, Arctic Oscillation effect, will be diminishing, and other than Sandy across the nation, especially the southeast U.S. and the southwest U.S., it looks like a very quiet week. Again, if you would like to sign up for Hurricane Sandy briefings, you can go to bluewateroutlook.com or listen to the video on bluewateroutlook.com. If you like the information on Blue Water Outlook, please pass that along to others who might also be interested. Thank you for listening to this week's edition of the Weekly Water Outlook.